All right, good to be up here again. I think we've got 30 minutes, so we'll be pretty quick. I think what we'll start off with is for the panelists to go through and just do a quick intro of yourselves, and then a little bit about your company, maybe less than a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. My name is Paul Lewin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Havoc. So we're a 2-year-old company, and what we're building is what we call collaborative autonomy. So basically, all the technologies required to make thousands of autonomous systems work together and work with the humans to achieve sophisticated tasks. So, in just 2 years, we've built 100 autonomous vessels. And we delivered 32 of them to various DOW customers. So I'm a former naval flight officer, and then I became a test pilot, and I got very familiar with the Pacific problem. And that's why we started Havoc 2 years ago, because we think the mass autonomy is a software problem, and a lot of people are too focused just on the platform and the hardware, and we went about it the opposite way and solved it in what you're familiar with in the Valley, right? Making a software-defined approach to this problem.
Thanks, Paul. And am I on? Green light. Okay, we're on. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Cody, for convening us up here. Garrett Smith, founder and CEO at a company called Reveal Technology. We build the common data and software fabric for the tactical edge ecosystem, building for edge and mobile devices first. We have thousands of licenses of commercial-grade technology actively deployed into the U.S. Army's enterprise networks through the Net Warrior program and emerging programs like Next Generation Command and Control and Soldier-Borne Mission Command and a variety of other things. It's great to be back on campus. I'm a 2015 graduate of the International Policy Studies program, which actually is now the MIP program in this building. And thanks to the Gordian Knot Center and my friend and mentor advisor, Joe Felter, who was my academic advisor for our practicum project back in 2014 to 15. It's great to be here. Reveal is a Series B stage company. We're about 7.5 years old. We've raised about $45 million of total venture capital over those 7 years. We've been extremely capital efficient. We've tripled revenue and tripled headcount every year for about 4 or 5 years now, and we're on the run. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Cody. Thanks, everybody. Ryan Castoni, blue-collar kid from Michigan, first-generation college student. Saw the ROTC program as a great way to pay for college and serve. So ran off to MIT, so it's good to be at the MIT of the West for this conference today. But ran off to MIT, studied aerospace engineering, commissioned, served 9 years as a special warfare officer, did a little bit in the 5.8 before I got out, so know a little bit about requirements in the POM process, enough to get myself in trouble. Then apprenticed as an early stage VC and standing up Two Bear Capital, and now on to my second startup on the executive side. So I'm the vice president of solution delivery for Web AI. We see the future not as an intelligent God brain in the cloud that you give your secrets away to and rent back. We think that it's private and distributed in a civilization of expert models that has the web, the network required in a peer-to-peer, zero trust sync capability to route the right question to the right intelligence at the right node at the right time. As you can imagine, that has significant applications in the DDIL environment as we look to our threats around the world. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Cody. I guess I'm sort of the black sheep of the panel here. So Matt Willis, I'm the director for the Army Fuse program. So as we heard, it's the capital engine behind the pit. So Army Fuse represents about an annual budget of a little north of $750 million, all non-dilutive research and development funding. And again, so we're really trying to identify new tech, accelerate capability development, and provide opportunities for companies to have access to cheaper capital, help them to scale and accelerate to support soldiers.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, thanks everyone for doing that. So Paul, I'll start with you. I think most folks in the audience probably know who Havoc AI is, and most of the folks in the Department of War do as well. But I don't quite think everyone understands like the true multi-domain collaborative autonomy that you've established today and that you guys have built. Can you talk through kind of the problem you're solving for the warfighter, and then how you're getting that in the hands of the warfighter to also validate that it fills the capability gap?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I think you've heard collaborative autonomy being mentioned by, General Gibbs. Obviously, the Department of War is talking about it. What is it, right? If you think about the two words, the collaborative and autonomy, when we say autonomy, what we mean is humans on the loop, right? A lot of times in industry, a lot of people are claiming remote control or waypoint planning as autonomy, right? That's not autonomy, that's automation. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that if you're thinking about the Pacific, it's 8,000 miles long. You're going to have denied environments. If a human needs to be in the loop, if one human needs to control one autonomous systems, that's not going to survive in a warfare environment, right? So you have to do humans on the loop, which is you should be able to tell autonomous systems, no matter what it is, right? Whether it's a boat, an aircraft, or ground where you go to say, I want you to search this area. Right? And you should be able to do that easily. And the systems take the human's intent and figure out how to do that. And so how do they do that? There are three things they have to do, right? They have to sense the environment. So perception, right? Using either EOIR cameras or radar or software-defined radios to figure out what's going on. And then you have to make decisions together, right? These systems need to talk to each other and figure out how to achieve the human's intent. And then the collaborative piece is important, right? They need to work together. But I'm a former naval flight officer. When we were flying F-18s, we didn't see them as aircraft, right? They were just a tool to get me and the weapon systems to where I needed to go. And a lot of times people forget that, right? The department isn't buying technology or cool aircraft or cool boats, right? They're buying capabilities. So if you're building something, you have to make sure that the warfighters can use it. And that's the collaborative piece, right? So the humans need to be able to get data from these systems and to task it. So right now, we have systems that are deployed with 25th ID in Balikatan. Right? We have 6 vessels that are in the Philippines and the island chains there, and they're ingesting data from whether they radar or EOIR, and they're putting it both into Maven and to NGC2. Right? And that's the collaborative piece. If you just build cool boats and you make them, remote control boats, all you have is a toy. But when you connect that system to be collaborative with existing infrastructure, then it's a capability, it's a weapons for the warfighters. So that's what we're doing. To do that, because it is a software problem, we've had to build a lot of vessels, right? We've used, venture-backed funding. To be transparent, Scout is our lead investor. Using venture funding, we've built 100 vessels. And we deploy them every day, on the East Coast, so in Rhode Island, in San Diego, and in Hawaii. And we've collected 150 billion data points. And using those data points, we've trained our perception models, our decision-making models, and our path planning algorithms, and our communication systems to make sure that they work in the real world. So that's what collaborative autonomy means, right? That's the only way the warfighter is going to put thousands of autonomous systems and make them do something, right? Otherwise, they're just cool toys and experiments.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. Dr. Willis, I'm going to skip over to you real quick. I think we also heard General Gibbs hit on this briefly, but can you talk about, from an Army Fuse perspective, how you guys look at dual use for single use companies and the importance of that, or lack thereof, but and how you look at that as hey, are these companies just solely relying on the government or the Army to survive, or do they have that dual stream of revenue, or at least the potential for it?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I certainly don't need to tell the folks in the room here, right, the importance of diversifying your customer base, right? I think so, within the Army, and we've talked about it already quite a bit today, the Army Transformation Initiative, acquisition reform, these are foundational changes in the way the Army does business. This isn't just, reshuffling the chairs and pretending, hey, we're entirely new. So it's, foundationally changing the decision process, having support from leadership to take risk and to move quickly. I mean, speed is of tantamount importance in order for us to get the greatest capabilities out to our soldiers as we can. Break. That being said, right, we are still the Army and we're still the government. We're still beholden to Congress and we're spending taxpayer money, right? And so while we can move much more quickly, we can execute awards in less than 30 days, We can be very transparent in terms of our demand signal at events like this. And we can make it very easy for companies to work with us and to help them scale. We still are, hampered a bit in terms of the budget process and other activities. And so while we can be a great customer and we can help companies scale, the revenue stream is, it's definitely cyclical. And having opportunities to, tap into innovation that's already happening in the private sector, leverage a commercial-centric technology to support an Army need is certainly, a core facet of the Army's transformation initiative and where we're really aiming for, right? Being able to leverage, capital that's already been invested in, developing capabilities and pivoting it to support a Department of War use case, I think is really, again, where we're focused.
Thanks, Dr. Willis. I appreciate that. I think the importance of the dual use, from a scout perspective, is like extremely important. So I just wanted that message to be heard from you. Ryan, I want to flip over to you. I think Web AI, want to be great, kind of talk a little bit more about Web AI in general, but also, your guys' approach from inception on working with the Army and being essentially like the sole startup to come out at least with some of the large industry players in a successful fashion. Do you mind diving into that some?
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Appreciate it. And I have to thank, I think you might have already left, but the Deputy Undersecretary gave me a good alley-oop on that one, so I got to thank him for it. That AI TTX that he was referencing, that call to industry, David Stout, our CEO and one of our co-founders, was one of the people to get that call. And he's a patriot. He wants to help, just like many of the CEOs that they called wanted to help. And so we had not yet created our public sector entity at that time. We have been a fully commercial enterprise-focused entity since inception. But David had started to see how what we were building could be helpful for our military. He and Jason Rathje, who is the president of our public sector, has started to talk about what it would look like to create a new public sector entity to focus on this. And David went into that AI TTX not trying to sell Web AI. He went in trying to understand what the problems were that we were facing in these futuristic scenarios and trying to think of the best way to solve it. And at the end of the day, he said, hey, if we can be helpful, give us a call. If not, I think this is what you should do whether you work with us or not, and here's why. And that went a long way. And then we were asked, in the middle of a government shutdown, plus 2 CRs, and everything else that was happening last fall and into the first part of this calendar year, a great news story for the Army, right? Like the Army was able to pull in a dozen different companies in one of the most challenging environments you can think of, from those government shutdowns and continuing resolutions, and bring together this collaborative group of companies that are generally fighting each other day in and day out to help solve problems for our warfighter. And so the one that I will give a little bit more info on, because it is public, is this what we're talking about here is Project ARIA, right? So the Army's rapid implementation of AI. There's several different projects. The one that we focus on with a bunch of large industry partners is the Model Armory. And it's developing, I explain it to my kids. I have 4 young kids, and so I like to explain it in a way they can understand. So I explain it like Santa Claus. So I say, all right, all the boys and girls, tell Santa Claus what they want for Christmas. Santa Claus has a few other things he takes into account. The parents might give him a nudge on what they should maybe get. He might look at your biome of where you're operating in. So if you live in Montana and you ask for a surfboard, maybe he switches it to a snowboard. But then he shrinks whatever that special capability is, throws it in his red sack, and delivers it to every girl and boy all over the world in one night. That's what we are trying to build in the Model Armory in this collaboration of industry partners. Is a soldier on the field says, I need this capability. And a model recommendation agent takes that natural language request, goes and queries the armory of all of the different AI capabilities that exist, maybe spins up a dynamic pipeline to quantize or do a quick tuning to make sure that present for that specific soldier, that model, that capability is going to work. Maybe it's on their S-23, Maybe it's on the actual device. Maybe it's a server in the back of a Bradley. But wherever it needs to go, that system figures out how to get that tool to the end user in a quick fashion. So that's what we're doing there. And I think it's all about that focus of, we have a CEO and investors that are willing to lean forward and know that the revenue is not going to come right away. But we know that if we invest and do the right thing by our warfighters, that's all that really matters in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the secretary did throw you a pretty good assist on that one.
That was a good assist. I got to thank him later.
That is good. All right, Garrett. Your company, albeit I think 7 or 8 years old at this point in time, you mentioned Series B, is the oldest of the companies that's on the panel here today. And there's a lot of talk about transformation in the Army and everything that's changed. How have you seen things change over the last year or two as a founder working, primarily with the Department of War?
Yeah, great question, Cody. First, I live in Montana, and I wouldn't mind a long gun chambered for 6.5 PRC, if you don't mind. I don't need a snowboard. I'm good. Yeah, so what has changed recently, given our lifespan, our life cycle? I would say that we have observed, heard, and been encouraged by the rhetorical energy from the department and from certain of the services and agencies and labs across our target ecosystem. But I would almost say that most of that energy has been rhetorical and not a lot of it has been material. And so when attending a conference like this called the Army Demand Signal Forum, demand signal can be projected verbally, orally, right? And we can say it to each other, we can get people all riled up and rallied for a cause with words, and that's important. Words often precede action. But a real demand signal, especially for young companies like ours, and the many hundreds or thousands that are emerging to service the national defense, the material demand signal has to be contracts, and not only contracts with ceiling, but material procurement dollars being spent to procure, field, sustain, maintain, and project those capabilities into operating environments. And so the executive orders, the SecWars, policy memos on software acquisition pathways, reinforcing the federal acquisition regulation as the umbrella under which basically anything can be done. All of that is great. The formation of the Army Fuse program, endowing it with resources and authorities, all of this is really great. But I would categorize it as rhetorical energy and rhetorical demand signal. We need material demand signal. And so we are encouraged that the future, the immediate future within the department, not just the Army, but the Department of War, needs to now progress into that next phase of material acquisition and procurement, spending PROC dollars, not just RDT&E, but PROC dollars within programs of record and other mechanisms to field capability. That is the real demand signal that our company and others will respond to.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear. I agree with you 100% as well, though. But I think definitely, as I was talking with folks last night at a dinner, I think the Army has made, and I think the Army is kind of ahead within the Department of War, but has made leaps and bounds on setting up Army Fuse and the pit as a whole and transformation and contact and all these things. I think the Army's well ahead of the other services for sure. I'm not just saying that because we're here. Paul, so
agree.
Yeah, talk about big dollars, Garrett. I think autonomy is extremely hot right now. I think we've probably heard it from everyone who's been up here today. I know General Gibbs talked about it quite a bit. If you see the budget that was just released, I think $50 billion plus tied to DOG and all these other lines, around autonomy. Since we're at the Army Demand Signal event, how would a warfighter see Havoc's technology actually on the battlefield or in a training environment? Can you kind of talk through that outside of maybe just maritime, but include maritime and other domains?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for us, since we were 6 months old, we have deployed with warfighters, whether it's in the Army, Navy, or through DIU programs. And it's very important because the way I see autonomy, as a former warfighter myself, it's autonomy. It's the way you turn TTPs, right, tactics, techniques, and procedures, into software, right? So that's all it is, right? What the soldiers and the sailors and the Marines One is for these robots, whether they're floating, they're flying, or on the ground, to provide them with capabilities, right? Something that they can't do. So right now, I'll start with maritime, right? I mentioned the Balikatan exercises going on in the Philippines. 25th ID has, about 6 of our autonomous vessels. And well, it's nighttime over there, so it's probably done for the day. But today, they were using it to try to find maritime targets. Using cameras and radar, and they were feeding it. So the way you tell it, our system, to such an area is literally you on a map-based C2 software, you say, hey, I think there's something in this area, and then you draw a box, and that's all you have to tell, right? If you think about it as a soldier, you're going to be under a lot of stress. If you need a PhD in robotics or such algorithm, that's not going to be, that's a science experiment, right? It's not actually a weapon system. It should be as easy as an M16. Anyone here could figure out how to shoot an M16. You might not be an expert at it, but you could figure out how to shoot it. And that's what we do at Havoc, right? So we turn autonomous systems into capabilities that actual operators can use. So, just today, they drew a map, a box in the ocean, and they said, I need maritime vessels to go search it. And the 6 vessels that were in the area received that tasking from the human, and they talked to each other, and they want and executed a sophisticated search pattern using their cameras and their radar. And when they found it, they created a target track, and then it was passed into Maven. Just yesterday, there were some 25th ID soldiers that said, hey, this is great that it's in Maven, but can you also put it into NGC2? They had a data lake. And that's the beauty of software, right? It's that, and being a software company, they thought it was going to take months, and my engineers who are embedded with them turned it around in a matter of 3 hours, and they started pushing data into this NGC2 data link. So as they were doing the NGC2 experiments at Balikatan, our boats were providing that info. So to your point about multi-domain, right, all domain, if all you have is boats or aircraft or ground vehicles operating isolated, it's not really useful, right? Those of us that have been warfighters, everything is joint for a reason, right? It's effective. So what we do is we make boats and aircraft and ground vehicles all work together. So for our maritime vessels, we launch quadcopters and fixed wing from it, both to get height for the sensors to see more of the oceans, but also as kinetic, right? One-way payloads. We're going to do the same thing with ground vehicles. We just bought a ground vehicle company that's here in Palo Alto that turns heavy ground trucks into autonomous systems. And for the Army, we want to provide autonomous convoys, right? That when they are attacked, they launch quadcopters and loitering munitions from these trucks to fight back. And that's where autonomy comes very powerful, right? And that's where, if you're a software company and you're data-driven and you can adapt with the speed of warfare, that you provide an actual capability to warfighters.
Thanks. As their lead investor, I get real excited when Paul talks about this. All right, Dr. Willis, I'll come back to you. We didn't talk too much about the X-Tech competitions that you guys hold, but one of the primary X-Tech competitions to date, at least in my mind, was the X-Tech Overwatch competition that was held in partnership with Army Applications Lab and 1st Cavalry Division in Texas, and kind of geared all around autonomy. What is Fuse doing to ensure that, hey, we down-selected 20 winners, those 20 winners are embedded at different echelons within 1st Cavalry Division, and the folks that are performing, like how is Fuse ensuring that there is money for those guys to scale to tranche buys or programs or aligned with PAEs, et cetera? Do you mind kind of going into that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And actually, I'm going to go back to foot-stopping what Garrett stated earlier, right? I think oftentimes, especially in the innovation space within the government, there's a lot of frenetic energy, a lot of stochasticity, and a lot of, I'd say, innovation theater. So a lot of talking and not a lot of actual doing, right? And so what we are trying to do within the Army, right, and as is demonstrable through competitions like the X-Tech Overwatch competition, is to get a lot of energy around a problem set and then actually deliver. So, in my mind, what we did in the X-Tech Overwatch competition is, I'd say, demonstrative of really the future in terms of Army innovation, right? So just for a little context, what were the key facets, right? So, starts and ends with a soldier. So we work directly with the 1st Cavalry Division, identify critical problem sets, and then they participated in this competition throughout, working directly with companies, providing feedback and assessing capability. We also worked, directly with the CPE, so with the CPE autonomy, so General Gibbs, right? So ultimately, with companies that have promising capabilities that are starting to scale, the CPE is going to be the one that's acquiring and sustaining those capabilities. The other piece is getting minimum viable products in the dirt early, often. It's great to develop something in Southern California and test it here, but it's not really reality in terms of how a capability is going to be used by a soldier and under which conditions, be it, in USAREF and USARPAC, wherever. So again, we need to develop capabilities and test them with soldiers, get that critical feedback. And so that was a very meandering answer, and I didn't really answer it. So how are we helping ensuring that these companies, so again, with this competition, we brought 40 companies to Bryant, Texas. We did an experimental demonstration with soldiers. 20 of those companies received prototyping awards, $2 million each, under Army Fuse. And so what's happening now? They're still actually working with 1st Cavalry Division. They're still getting active feedback, going through prototype development. And the beauty of what we've done within the PIT and within Army Fuse is our funding is quite flexible, right? So with those companies that are demonstrating promise, are solving a problem that we have the ability to leverage additional funding sources within Army Fuse to help them scale. And again, get them on that path to be integrated into the CPE autonomy portfolio as it makes sense. So again, it's really all about bringing all of these holistic pieces together from soldier, from the acquisition ecosystem, and certainly from non-dilutive resourcing.
Yeah, and I'd say for the startups that are out there, I do believe that the X-Tech competitions, you just put on one last week in Miami. Those are great opportunities to talk directly with the end users and the warfighter. But if you're selected, then you get to work directly with them for an extended period of time, hopefully getting on some sort of contract. And so I'd encourage you, if you're not familiar with X-Tech, to definitely take the time to dive into that. Ryan, in these last two questions, we don't have a ton of time, so I apologize, so probably relatively shorter answers. WebAI established a separate entity on the public sector side, as you talked about, and Jason Rathje, who's former OSC, kind of stood that up, and you and Jason worked together on that. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that? And I think it's probably helpful more for the startups on the side. And then also, the importance to having folks like, yourself and Jason who kind of understand the Army and the Department of War and all of that versus like showing up without having any sort of understanding of your customer.
Heard on keep it quick. Got it. So one quick connection though. So when I was in my investor days, I focused a lot on digital health. And every time I saw an awesome digital health company who didn't have a doctor as part of the team, we started having a conversation. Because you have to know your customer. And if you want to sell to a hospital, if you want to sell into insurance companies, if you want to sell directly to doctors, you're going to need a doctor on your team. Our opinion is if you're going to sell into the Department of War, the Department of Defense, if you're going to sell into the public sector, you need experts who have walked the walk and talked the talk. And it's not just get your soft buddy who just got out and like sell to his buddies that are still in a BD role, right? Like that's well and good, but it's Jason Rathje who helped create AFWorks and was the first director who created the Office of Strategic Capital, who has a PhD from this institution focused on public-private capital and how do we do the best to build startups for our national defense. And yeah, it helps to have guys who've been on the ground. And even though I did serve in the Air Force, it was a lot of joint time, so I know joint is spelt A-R-M-Y. And so I can lead Army projects with the 25th ID, with Project Aria, and I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I'm proficient in being able to speak Army. And so with my engineers who have never worked with the department before, I can be that translator because you just don't have time when you're in a Lightning Surge 3 scoping meeting on island with the 25th. They can't go through every single acronym. in every single conversation that they have. And you just got to get your engineers up to speed later. And if you can't do that fast enough, you're just not going to be effective. And so Jason did a great job of convincing David, our CEO, and the board that, hey, if you want to start a public sector entity, it's not one person. There were 6 of us that were brought in all at once at the beginning to go focus on Project Aria, build out this capability and these relationships with the department. And that was a choice. That was an investment that CEO and board decided to make, that they could have put that investment elsewhere. But we're here because this is how we think we can best help our warfighter.
Yeah. Thanks for walking through that. And Garrett, somewhat of similar, but a little different, because as the founder, what I learned last night, I guess, is that Marine ground intel officers are a rare breed. And I work with one as well at Scout. But, you lived the problem for quite some time before then leaving, starting, and then building your company to solve that problem. How have you seen that both positive and negative as a founder within that? Or maybe there is not a negative to it. But any thoughts there?
First, I think we're being shorted time, me in particular, because I'm wearing a Marine Corps pin at an Army event. So apologies to everybody who had to.
And the Air Force guy.
Air Force, naval flight officers, but it's a great question, Cody. So I actually think there's no downside if you're willing to hire yourself out of a job in the early phase and hire the experts that Ryan's talking about and that benefit from and can access programs like Dr. Willis's, FUSE effort tied in with greater Army acquisitions and other acquisitions mechanisms. So I don't see a downside, and I see it in the same way that Ryan does, absolutely essential to have warfighter presence within the operating element of a business, preferably at influential levels, be it executive, co-founder, or whatever. There's no way that we could do what we do and be successful in the way that we are successful now and will be in the future without that kind of a presence. I see literally zero downside unless you refuse to hire experts, domain experts downstream of that.
Yeah, awesome. No, we would 100% agree with that from a Scout Ventures perspective and see it day in and day out, which is why we like to partner with folks like Paul, but the rest of you as well. Well, awesome. Well, we are at time. Thank you all for making the time to come. I mean, I think these are some of the most high caliber entrepreneurs and operators in the space, so really appreciate it. And Dr. Willis, thank you as well, and give the perspective from FUSE. But if we can get a quick round of applause for the panel, I appreciate it.